That is why you see when the Chinese president invites African president, all of them, without exception, run to Beijing very quickly. And when they get to Beijing, they are given $60 billion, all of them, the 55 of them, to share. And I ask myself, why don't you ask Nigeria's Aliko Dangote? You don't have to move. Aliko will give you 60 billion. He has it. And if he doesn't have it, you ask Patrick Motsepe from South Africa to add a little more. And if you didn't ask him, and may his soul rest in peace before he passed on, you asked Reginald Mengi here to add a little more. He could. And if it is not much, there is no shortage of Africans who can give you that money, because there is no free lunch. Because let me tell you, and I don't blame the Chinese, but I worry about them and about us. Today, in any African country, notwithstanding that over the years, our universities have produced professionals, the Chinese are the ones building our stadia. I do not know whether the stadium here in Dar es Salaam was built by Tanzanians. You will tell me. I need to be educated. But I suspect that there was a Chinese hand. If you go to Nairobi, Kenya is the same. You go to any country, to Uganda, the same. And the Chinese are now, in a very subtle way, in every other African university, they are bringing something called the Confucius Institute. Educate me. At the University of Nairobi, there is one. In Makerere, there is one. In Zambia, there is one. My brethren Tanzanians, tell me, do you have one here? There is no free lunch. The Chinese have recognized that the mind is the standard of the man. And therefore, the way to capture our minds is to have institutes in our highest institutions of learning. Once you capture the minds of their very best, then you've captured them. In 100 years' time, we'll be wondering how they did it. This is how they did it. This is how they did, and I don't blame them one iota. If we were organized as Africans, we would be having the African institutes in each universities, where we would teach comparative culture. Today, a number of countries are adopting Mandarin as the language of choice. We are surrendering to the dominant Chinese culture. And we are wondering how we will be a Pan-African. We are losing the war. We are losing it. The Chinese know what they want, and they must be celebrated and praised for it. Because any civilization that knows what they want will always reach their destination. Do we know what we want? We don't. We must, in the nature of things, restructure our universities. Time has come that we must ask ourselves, what are we teaching at our universities? What are we teaching? If it is in engineering, you go to many engineering schools in Africa and look at the equipment that is being used. Perhaps in some universities, the equipment should be in the museum alongside the spinning wheel. At a time when people are talking about nanotechnology and 5G, You go to typical African university, we're still using blackboard and chalk. And others are teaching differently, yet we think we are going to compete. We are not going to compete. Right now, people are talking about 5G. But what are we Africans doing? We are watching and observing and celebrating as if we are watching a football match between the United States of America and China, asking which one will win? Because the winner is the one that will conquer us again. It's painful but true. We are not there. We are not in the arena. As the saying goes, you can't win the lottery if you don't buy the ticket. And we have not bought the ticket. No amount of prayer and fasting is going to help us. We can pray and fast all we want, but God is not a magician. God tells you, go ye and subdue the world. We are not subduing the world. The world is subduing us. So what are we teaching? We must begin to think differently for the Pan-African project to succeed. We must begin to act as one unit. Recently in Mozambique, Mother Nature devastated the city of Beira. 90% of it was destroyed. The city of Beira, 90% gone. I waited for Africans to say that we are going to donate 1% of our budget. It is only Namibia and South Africa, and to a certain extent Kenya and a few other countries that went there. But the following week, there was a church in Notre Dame in Paris that burned, and within 1 week, they had raised 1 billion. In fact, more, I think, approaching 1 trillion. Including a donation from a traditional chief in Cote d'Ivoire, who was very devastated that one of his brothers or somebody related to him had been baptized at the church in Notre Dame. If you now go to Beira, it is not African engineers who are involved in restoring or African professionals. You will discover that some Portuguese firm, possibly, and some Chinese firm are the ones who are involved. Africa is now in the business of discovering natural gas and oil. Who is exploiting that oil? If it is not tallow, it is Elf. If it is not Elf, it is ExxonMobil. If it is not ExxonMobil, it is Total. Africa, Ali Mazrui was right, produces what it does not consume and consumes what it does not produce. We know, but we must remind ourselves, because sometimes we sit pretty and think that everything is fine. Everything is not fine. You are here. Allow me to be morbid. In 100 years' time, all of you will be upstairs. All of you. Without exception. All of you. But I want you to imagine for one moment how Africa will be. You know, some times ago, the Chinese, and I'm on the Chinese because I'm seeing them. I never saw the white man coming. I was too young or unborn. But this one I can see. The Chinese had a policy of only 1 child. Then suddenly they said, we are now allowing couples to have a 2nd child. That 2nd child is going to be here. That 2nd child is the child that is going to conquer us if we are not organized. I do not know, but when I travel across the continent of Africa, I see Chinese very quiet, and African middle class is happiest when they go to a Chinese restaurant on Saturday. We are going for Chinese dinner. It is a statement of how sophisticated we are. I'm submitting to us that we must do something about it. So, ladies and gentlemen, Africa can be great, and Africa must be great. But we must begin to do something about it. The question is, what are we doing? The problem that some of us have is that we feel helpless. We hold the view that we are not in political positions, and therefore we cannot influence processes. My good friend Pole Pole is here, and he is a politician whom I know. The question is, what must you do within your systems in the political arena to begin to energize processes? One must ask, for example, here in the East African region, what are we doing to ensure that in this region we think as one? I fly from Nairobi 1 hour, 5 minutes, and I now have to grapple with Tanzanian shilling. My Kenyan shilling becomes suddenly useless. I leave Tanzania, I go to Burundi, I grapple with the Burundian franc. I leave Burundi, I grapple with the the Rwandese franc. I go to Uganda, I'm grappling with the Ugandan shilling. I move upstairs, I'm dealing with the pound. I move to Angola, I'm dealing with the kwanza. 55, almost 50 currencies, which are effectively useless. Because even the leaders don't believe in them. When the Sudanese head of state is arrested and they search his house, you don't find the Sudanese pound. You find the American dollar. And you find the euro. We also don't have faith in our own currencies. And our currencies are going to remain weak as long as we are not united. So in the East African region, what can we do? I travel and I get to Julius Kambarage International Airport, and I'm told very politely, as is the culture in Tanzania, jaza fomu ya kuingia. And I obey. But should I, after flying for 1 hour, 5 minutes, an American will fly from Boston in Massachusetts to Oakland in California, 6 hours later, no forms filled, no yellow fever certificate, no passport, no new telephone number. The country works. Here, I'm now in 255, having migrated from 254. I'm dealing with Tigo, and even Tigo is not Tanzania. I'm dealing with Airtel. Even Airtel is not Tanzania. I'm dealing with Vodafone. We own nothing. Pole pole. But if we are East Africa, we can begin to own things. When we begin to negotiate as East Africa and we negotiate with the EU, we begin to make sense to them. But if we are alone, somebody was telling me that African economies are growing, and I told them, yes, they are growing. But no matter how fast a goat grows, it can only be a fat goat, it can't be a cow. So what we must do is that we must combine all these little goats into a big elephant, and we'll begin to make sense. Kwame Nkrumah, may he rest in peace. How relevant you are 56 years ago today, when you spoke on that day in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and reminded us that Africa had to unite. If today I were to write, as Nkosana and Lamini Zuma wrote in the year 2013, if today I were to write a letter to our founding fathers who died several years ago, this is how the letter would read. I would not name all of them, but I would name the following. I would say, Dear Kwame Nkrumah, Dear Kambarage Nyerere, Dear Patrice Emery Lumumba, Dear Modibo Keita, Dear Ahmed Sekou Touré, Dear Thomas Sankara, Dear Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, we are gathered here today in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, on this 25th day of May in 2019. And we are pretending to be discussing a new subject, but we are not. In fact, my dear fathers, we are discussing something that you discussed 56 years ago. And we are now recognizing that you warned us that if we did not unite, we will be conquered again. I am sadly reporting to you that we are being conquered again. We are being conquered again in the manner that you feared, and I'm now telling you that this time round our conquest is a little more subtle. I am telling you, Osagyefo, that now, although in 1961 you had created the University of Ghana at Legon, and you had also created the University of Science and Technology, in many African universities we are now accommodating Confucius Institutes. Osagyefo, we do not know what they are going to teach there in 100 years' time. But for the moment, they tell us is aid and that they like us. But Osagyefo, I agree with you, there is no free lunch. We are also sitting here today in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, the home of your brother, Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And we also are reminding ourselves that Nyerere came up with a philosophy called Ujamaa, which was self-reliance. We can now tell you that in substance, Mwalimu was right. But unfortunately, we are still importing things from Europe. We now have mobile phones, which you did not have when you were alive. But unfortunately, Mwalimu, those mobile phones, none of them is made in Africa. Last week, we saw an attempt by somebody to claim that one was made in Rwanda, but I suspect it was only assembled in Rwanda. Mwalimu, we are trying. I can now also confirm to you that we have many political parties, just as you feared, Osagyefo. In Congo, there are 233. But Congo is not at peace. In Tanzania, they don't have very many, but I can assure you CCM is still doing very well. But Tanzania is the exception rather than the rule. After every election, Mwalimu, we fight. In Kenya, we did. Then we shake hands. Then we fight. Then we shake them again. We are in the business of shaking hands. In Central Africa, we are fighting. Our young men and women are drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. We now know you are right. And therefore, going forward, we are today taking a solemn vow that each one of us will use the resources at our disposal, and that we are going as a product of this conference to send a paper which will emanate out of Julius Kambarage Festival, which paper will be sent to the African Union. And that paper will tell the African Union that there is a sense of urgency. And it will not stop there. That paper will also be sent to all the 55 African heads of state, reminding them that there is need for Africa to trade with ourselves, that there is need for Africans to travel on one visa, that there is need for Africans to have one currency, that there is need for Africans to define ourselves. And Osagyefo, I remind you, I remember during your lifetime, you hosted both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. And I am reminded that at one time he was asking his people in the United States of America how long it would take to unite Africa. We are now telling you that it's not too long. It is not going to be long, because young men and women are now telling us that we unite or we perish. Osagyefo, Mwalimu, Seko, I would have written a longer letter, but I can now see that my audience wants to go for lunch. Permit me, therefore, to stop here in the knowledge that Pan-Africanism is alive and well, and Africa will realize our potential even if it takes 100 years. God bless you.